finds his crown in water deep, till Turin wakes again from sea.
Howdy, howdy.
And during
Pressing the key to skip. Okay. Let's get this started. Hope everyone's having a great day. Let's start our audiobook back up. I don't remember where we left off, so
But
I'm just
fair
gonna start
and
it here.
noble as were the forms in which they were manifest to the children of Iluvatar, they were but a veil upon their beauty and their power. And if little is here said of all that the Eldar once knew, that is as
try to get
nothing
some stuff
compared
done.
with their true being.
Let's go,
Which
Mournberg.
goes back into regions and ages
Let's go, Mournberg.
far beyond our thought. Among them, 9 were of chief power and reverence. But 1 is removed from their number, and 8 remain. The Aratar,
What are we gonna
the
do
high
today?
ones of Arda. Manwe and Vada, Ulmo,
Okay.
Yavanna and Aule, Mandos, Niena, and Orome. Though Manwe is their king and holds their allegiance under Eru, in majesty they are
So we gotta
peers,
clear out this
surpassing
here.
beyond compare all others,
We have to
whether of the
go
Valar and the Maya,
Trans-Highway
or of any other
the
order that
mines.
Iluvatar
We gotta go
has
this
sent
way.
into
Let's go this
Ea.
way.
Of the Maya. With the Valar came other spirits, whose being also began before the world, of the same order as the Valar, but of less degree. These are the Maya, the people of the Valar, and their servants and helpers.
To the mines.
Their number is not known to the elves, and few have names in any of the tongues of the children of Iluvatar.
Can't remember where we went. I should have looked.
For though it is otherwise in Ammon, in Middle-earth, the Maya have
looked like an
seldom
old stream.
appeared in form visible to elves.
My previous
and men.
one. But I think we'll be alright.
Chief among the Maya of Valinor, whose names are remembered in the histories of the elder days, are Ilmare, the handmaid of Varda, and Eonwe, the banner-bearer and herald of Manwe, whose might in arms is surpassed by none in Arda. But of all the Maya, Assa and Uinen are best known to the children of Iluvatar. Osse is a vassal of Ulmo, and he is master of the seas that wash the shores of Middle-earth. He does not go into the deeps, but loves the coasts and the isles, and rejoices in the winds of Manwe. For in storm he delights, and laughs amid the roaring of the waves.
Jesus.
His spouse is Uinen, the Lady of the Sea, whose hair lies spread through all waters under sky. All creatures she loves that live in the salt streams, and all weeds that grow there. To her mariners cry, for she can lay
So here's
calm upon the
Cole.
waves, restraining the wildness of
Oh,
Assa.
that's right. We had our
The
map.
Númenóreans lived long in her protection,
We had a new
and held
base.
her in reverence equal to the Valar.
That's right. We built our map
Melkor
stone.
hated the sea, for he could not subdue it. It is said that in the making of Arda, he endeavored to draw Assa to his allegiance, promising to him all the realm and power of Ulmo if he would serve him. So it was that long ago there arose great tumults in the sea that wrought
Put these
ruin
up.
to the land.
That's right.
But Uinen, at the prayer of Aula, restrained Assa and brought him before Ulmo.
Nice.
And he was pardoned and returned to his allegiance, to which he has remained faithful, for the most part. For the delight in violence has never wholly departed from him, and at times he will rage in his willfulness, without any command from Ulmo, his lord. Therefore those who dwell by the sea or go up in ships may love him, but they do not trust him. Melian was the name of a Maya who served both Vana and Esther. She dwelt long in Lorien, tending the trees that flower in the gardens of Irmo, ere she came to Middle-earth. Nightingales sang about her wherever she went. Wisest of the Maya was Olorin. He too dwelt in Lorien, but his ways took him
We get the
often
ranger
to the
notes
house
too.
of Nienna, and of her he learned pity and patience. Of Melian, much is told in the Quenta Silmarillion. But of Olorin, that tale does not speak. Although he loved the elves, he walked among them unseen.
I think this is
or
still the
in form
epilogue.
as
I don't
one
think
of
this
them,
is chapter
and
1
they did
yet.
not know whence came the fair visions or the promptings of wisdom that he put into their hearts. In later days, he was the friend of all the children of Iluvatar, and took
It's 10.
pity on their sorrows. And those who listened to him awoke from despair and put away the imaginations of darkness. Of the enemies, last of all is set the name of Melkor, he who arises in might. But that name he has forfeited, and the Noldor, who among the elves suffered most from his malice, will not utter it, and they name him Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world.
Oh, more
Great might was given to him by Iluvatar, and he was coeval with Manwë. In the powers and knowledge of all the other Valar he had part, but he turned them to evil purposes, and squandered his strength in violence and tyranny. For he coveted Arda,
Okay.
and all that was in it, desiring the kingship of Manwë and dominion over the realms of his peers. From splendor he fell through arrogance to contempt for all things save himself, a spirit wasteful and pitiless. Understanding, he turned to subtlety and perverting to his own will all that he would use,
Where's
until he became a
the-
liar without shame.
There we
He
go.
began with
Oh, I
the
need
desire
steel
of
ingots.
light, but when he could not possess it for himself alone,
Iron ingots.
he descended through fire and wrath into a great burning, down into darkness.
Fine. Get rid
In
of some of this
darkness he
coal.
used most in his evil works upon Arda, and
Let's
filled it
do
with
a coal
fear
pallet,
for all
actually.
living things. Yet so great was the power of his uprising that in ages forgotten he contended with Manwë and all the Valar, and through long years in Arda held dominion over most of the lands of the earth. But he was not alone. For of the Maya, many were drawn to his splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness. And others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts.
Need more stone.
Dreadful among these spirits were the Valar Aukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called
Scraps of
the
fire.
Balrogs, demons of terror. Among those of his servants that have names, the greatest was that spirit whom the Eldar called Sauron, or Gothar the Cruel. In his beginning,
the Cruel.
he was of the Maya
Oh, shit.
of Aule, and he remained mighty in the lore of that people. In all the deeds of Melkor, from Morgoth upon Arda, in his
I need
vast
some
work,
torches over here.
and in the deceits of his cunning, Sauron had a part, and was only less evil than his master, in that for long he served another and not himself. But in after years, he rose like a shadow of Morgoth, and a ghost of his malice, and walked behind him on the same ruinous path down into the void. Here ends the Valaquenta.
Nice. It's the end of this chapter. Okay, let's set up some torches. Here. Let's go back here. Let's do some wall torches, maybe? Needs resources. Oh, metal fragments. Got
Silmarillion.
okay, let's just
History
do
of the
standing
Silmarils.
torches. Oh, I still need metal fragments. Okay.
Of the beginning of days. It is told among the wise that the first war began before Arda was full-shaped, and ere yet there was anything that grew or walked upon earth. And for long
wall
Melkor
torch.
had the upper hand. But in the midst of the war, a spirit of great strength and hardihood came to the aid of the Valar, hearing in the far heaven that there was battle in the little kingdom, and Arda was filled with the sound of his laughter. So came Tulkas the Strong, whose anger passes like a mighty wind, scattering cloud and darkness before it. And Melkor fled before his wrath and his laughter, and forsook Arda, and there was peace for a long age. And Tulkas
Jesus.
remained, and became one of the Valar of the kingdom.
One thing I don't
of
like
Arda.
is the building in
But
this.
Melkor brooded in the outer darkness, and his
Wish I
hate
could
was
see
given to Tulkas forever.
Where I'm building it a lot easier.
In that time,
There we go.
the Valar brought order to the seas and the lands and the mountains, and Yavanna planted at last the seeds that she had long devised. And since when the fires were subdued or buried beneath the primeval hills, there was need of light, Aule, at the prayer of Yavanna, wrought 2 mighty lamps for the lighting of the Middle Earth, which he had built amid the encircling seas. Then Varda filled the lamps, and Manwë hallowed them, and the Valar set them upon high pillars more lofty far than are any mountains of the later days. One lamp they raised near to the north of Middle-earth, and it was named Illuin. And the other was raised in the south, and it was named Ormal.
Perfect.
And the light of the lamps of the Valar flowed out over the earth, so that all was lit, as it were in a changeless day.
Damn, that fucking moved quick.
Then the seeds that Yavanna had sown began swiftly to sprout and to burgeon. And there arose a multitude of growing things great and small, mosses and grasses and great ferns, and trees whose tops were crowned with cloud as they were living mountains, but whose feet were wrapped in a green twilight.
Need a better
And
pickaxe.
beasts came forth, and dwelt in the grassy plains, or in the rivers and the lakes, or walked in the shadows of the woods. As yet no flower had bloomed, nor any bird had sung, for these things waited still their time in the bosom of Yavanna. But wealth there was of her imagining, nowhere more rich than in the
shit.
midmost parts of the earth, where the light of both the lamps met and blended. And there upon the Isle of Almarin, in the Great Lake, was the first dwelling
damn
of
it.
the Valar, when all things were young. And new-made green was yet a marvel in the eyes of the makers, and they were long content. Now it came to pass that while the Valar rested from their labors and watched the growth and unfolding of the things that they had devised and begun, Manwë ordained a great feast, and the Valar and all their host came at his bidding. But Aule and Tulkas were weary, for the craft of Aule and the strength of Tulkas had been at the service of all without ceasing in the days of their labor. And Melkor knew of all that was done, for even then he had secret friends and spies among the Maiar, whom he had converted to his cause. And far off in the darkness, he was filled with hatred, being jealous of the work of his peers, whom he desired to make subject to himself. Therefore, he gathered to himself spirits out of the halls of Ea, that he had perverted to his service, and he deemed himself strong. And seeing now his time, he drew near again to Arda, and looked down upon it, and the beauty of the earth in its spring filled him the more with hate. Now therefore the Valar were gathered upon Almaren, fearing no evil, and because of the light of Illuin, they did not perceive the shadow in the north that was cast from afar by Melkor, for
We
he
need
was
some
grown
stone.
dark as the
That's what we
night of
need.
the void. And it is sung that in that feast of the spring of Arda, Tulkas espoused Nessa, the sister of Orome, and she danced before the Valar upon the green grass of Almaren. Then Tulkas slept, being weary and content, and Melkor deemed that his hour had come. And he passed therefore over the walls of the night with his host, and came
Shit.
to Middle-earth far in the north, and the Valar were not aware of him. Now Melkor began the delving and building of a vast fortress deep under earth, beneath dark mountains
cold.
where the beams of Illuin were cold and dim. That stronghold was named Utumno, and though the Valar knew naught of it as yet, Nonetheless, the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of Arda was marred. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked
Silver
with
ore?
weeds and
Jesus.
slime. And fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies, and forests grew dark and perilous, the haunts of fear. And beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood.
Ooh, Ranger's Journal.
Then
Nice.
the Valar knew indeed that Melkor was at work again, and they sought for his hiding place. But Melkor, trusting in the strength of Utumno and the might of his servants, came forth suddenly to war, and struck the first blow ere the Valar were prepared.
This is where all
And he
the
assailed
shit
the
was, huh?
lights of Illuin and Ormel, and cast down their pillars, and broke their lamps. In the overthrow of the mighty pillars, lands were broken, and seas arose in
We
tumult.
go this way.
And when the lamps were spilled, destroying flame was poured out over the earth. And the shape of Arda, and the symmetry of its waters and its lands, was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. In the confusion and the darkness, Melkor escaped, though fear fell upon him. For above the roaring of the seas he heard the voice of Manwë as a mighty wind, and the earth trembled beneath the feet of Tulkas. But he came to Autumno ere Tulkas could overtake him, and there he lay hid. And the Valar could not at that time overcome
Oh
him,
shit.
for the greater part of their strength was needed to restrain the tumults of the earth, and to save from ruin all that could be saved of their labor.
Okay.
And afterwards they feared to rend the earth again, until they knew where the children of Iluvatar were dwelling, who were yet to come in a time that was hidden from the Valar. Thus ended the spring of Arda. The dwelling of the Valar upon Almaren was utterly destroyed, and they had no abiding place upon the face of the earth. Therefore they departed from Middle-earth and went to the land of Aman, the westernmost of all lands upon the borders of the world. For its west shores looked upon the outer sea, that is called by the elves Ekaya, encircling the kingdom of Arda. How wide is that sea, none knew.
See how
but
far
the
we can
Valar,
get in.
And beyond it are the walls of the night.
It's kind of dark,
But
but
the east shores of Aman were the uttermost end of Belager, the great sea of the west. And since Melkor was returned to Middle-earth, and they could not yet overcome him, the Valar fortified their dwellings, and upon the shores of the sea they raised the Pelori, the mountains of Aman, highest upon earth. And above all the mountains of the Pelori was that height upon whose summit Manwë set his throne. Taniquetil the elves named that holy mountain, and Oyolassa, everlasting whiteness, and Elarina crowned with stars, and many names beside. But the Sindar spoke of it in their later tongue as Amon Uilas. From their halls upon Taniquetil, Manwë and Varda could look out across the earth, even into the furthest east. Behind the walls of the Pelori, the Valar established their domain in that region which is called Valinor. And there were their houses, their gardens, and their towers. In that guarded
Water.
land, the Valar gathered great store
Gold.
of light, and all the fairest things that were saved from the ruin. And many others yet fairer they
can
made
we
anew.
swim that
And
way?
Valinor became more beautiful even than Middle-earth in the spring of Arda. And it was
Mapstone's
blessed,
there.
for the deathless dwelt there. And there
can't get
naught
through, huh?
faded nor withered. Neither was there any stain upon flower or leaf in that land, nor any corruption or sickness in anything that lived. For the very stones and waters were hallowed. And when Valinor was full
risk
wrought,
it.
and the mansions of the Valar were established, in the midst of the plain
Oh.
beyond the mountains they built their
Okay.
city, Valmar of many bells. Before its western gate there was a green mound, Ezoloha, that is named also Coralaira. And Yavanna hallowed it, And she sat there long upon the green grass and sang a song of power, in which was set all her thought of things that grow in the earth. But Nienna thought in silence, and watered the mound with tears. In that time, the Valar were gathered together to hear the song of Yavanna, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council, in the Mahanaxa, the Ring of Doom, near to the golden gates of Valmar. And Yavanna Kementari sang before them, and they watched. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song, the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower. And thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna made, they have most renown.
Okay.
And about their fate, and all the tales of the elder days are woven. The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were a shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Telperion, the one was called in Valinor.
All right.
And
Here we go.
Silpion,
Let's risk it.
and Ninqualote, and many other names. But Laurelin the other was, and Malinalda,
Oh, I died?
and Coluria,
Oh, fuck.
many names in song beside. In 7 hours,
Oh, I got a
the glory of
fucking
each
arrow in
tree
my head.
waxed to full and waned again to naught. And
Shit.
each awoke once more to life an
Okay.
hour before the other ceased to shine.
Fuck.
Thus in
Converted.
Valinor, twice every day, there came a gentle hour of softer light when both trees were faint and their gold and
Mushroom
silver beams
stew.
were mingled. Telperion was
let's
the
go.
elder of the trees and came
Fuck.
first to full stature and to bloom.
God damn it.
And that
All right,
first
hopefully I
hour
don't
in which he
need
shone,
anything along the
the
way.
white glimmer of a silver
I don't remember
dawn,
how to get back there, too.
the Valar reckoned not into the tale of hours, but named it the opening hour, and counted from it the ages of their reign in Valinor. Therefore, at the 6th hour of the first day, and of all the joyful days thereafter, until the darkening of Valinor, Telperion ceased his time of flower, and at the 12th hour, Laurelin her blossoming. And each day of the Valar in Aman contained 12 hours, and ended with the second mingling of the lights, in which Laurelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. But the light that was spilled from the trees endured long, ere it was taken up into the airs or sank down into the earth. And the dews of Telperion, and the rain that fell from Laurelin, Varda hoarded in great vats like shining lakes, that were to all the land of the Valar as wells of water and of light. Thus began the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus began also the count of time. But as the ages drew on to the hour appointed by Iluvatar for the coming of the firstborn, Middle-earth lay in a twilight beneath the stars that Varda had wrought in the ages forgotten of her labors in Ea. And in the darkness, Melkor dwelt, and still often walked abroad in many
cool.
shapes of power and fear.
Made it back.
And he wielded cold and fire from the tops of the mountains to the deep furnaces that are beneath them. And whatsoever was cruel or violent or deadly in those days is laid to his charge. From the beauty and bliss of Valinor, the Valar came seldom over the mountains to Middle-earth, but gave to the land beyond the Pelori their care and their love.
I see prey ahead.
And in the midst of the blessed realm were the mansions of Aule.
These assholes are dead,
There
so.
he labored long. For in the making of all things in that land, he had the chief part, and he wrought there many beautiful and shapely
Shadow.
works, both openly and in secret. Of him comes the lore and knowledge of the earth, and of all things that it contains, whether the lore of those things that make not, but seek only for the understanding of what is, or the lore of all craftsmen, the weaver, the shaper of wood, and the worker in metals, and the tiller and husbandman also, though these last and all that deal with things that grow and bear fruit must look also to the spouse
Torch
of
has gone
Aule,
out.
Yavanna Kementari.
So,
Aule it is who is named the friend of the Noldor, for of him they learned much in after days, and they are the most skilled of the elves, and in their own fashion according to the gifts which Iluvatar gave to them. They added much to his teaching, delighting in tongues and in scripts, and in the figures of broidery, of drawing, and of carving. The Noldor also it was who first achieved the making of gems, and the fairest of all gems were the Silmarils, and they are lost. But Manwe Sulimo, highest and holiest of the Valar, sat upon the borders of Aman, forsaking not in his
get rid of
thought the outer
parsnips,
land.
get the torch.
For his throne was set in majesty upon the pinnacle of Taniquetil, the highest of the mountains of the world, standing upon the margin of the sea. Spirits in the shape of hawks and eagles flew ever to and from his halls. And their eyes could see to the depths of the seas and pierce the hidden caverns beneath the world. Thus they brought word to him of well nigh all that passed in Arda. Yet some things were hidden even from the eyes of Manwe and the servants of Manwe. For where Melkor sat in his dark thought, impenetrable shadows lay. Manwe has no thought for his own honor, and is not jealous of his power, but rules all to peace. The Vanya he loved best of all the elves, and of him they received song and poetry. For poetry is the delight of Manwe, and the song of words is his music. His raiment is blue, and blue is the fire of his eyes, and his scepter is of sapphire, which the Noldor wrought for him. And he was appointed to be the vice-regent of Iluvatar, king of the world of Valar, and elves and men, and the chief defense against the evil of Melkor.
I see the bottom right.
With Manwe dwelt Varda the most beautiful, she who in the Sindarin tongue is named Elbereth, queen of the Valar, maker of the stars. And with them were a great host of spirits in blessedness. But Ulmo was alone, and he abode not in Valinor, nor ever came thither, unless there were need for
Bottom
a great
right, I
council.
think that's means the horde's
He
gonna come
dwelt
soon,
from
right?
the beginning of Arda in the outer ocean, and still he dwells there. Thence he governs the flowing of all waters, and the ebbing, the courses of all rivers, and the replenishment of springs, the distilling of all dews and rain in every land beneath the sky. In the deep places, he gives thought to music great and terrible.
Making too much noise, I
The
assume.
echo of that music runs through all the veins of the world in sorrow and in joy. For if joyful is the fountain that rises in the sun, its springs are in the wells of sorrow unfathomed at the foundation of the earth. The Teleri learned much of Ulmo, and for this reason, their music has both sadness and enchantment. Salmar came with him to Arda, he who made the horns of Ulmo, that none may ever forget who once has heard them. And
I think I've cleared this area out. This area is dark. I wonder what this dark area is.
Of the inner seas, and many other spirits
Why it's dark. I wonder if there's like more
and thus it was
stuff
by the
that
power
way?
of Ulmo
Maybe?
that even under the darkness of Melkor, life coursed still through many secret lodes, and the earth did not die. And to all who were lost in that darkness, or wandered far from the light of the Valar, the ear of Ulmo was ever open. Nor has he ever forsaken Middle-earth. And whatsoever may since have befallen of ruin or of change, he has not ceased to take thought for it, and will not until the end of days.
Gotta check out that way
And in
now.
that time of dark, Yavanna also was unwilling utterly to forsake the outer lands. For all
build a
things that
path
grow are dear to her.
that way.
And she mourned for the works that she had begun in Middle-earth, but Melkor had marred. Therefore, leaving
Jesus.
the house of Aule and the flowering meads of Valinor, she would come at times and heal the hurts of Melkor. And returning, she would ever urge the Valar to that war with his evil dominion, that they must surely wage ere the coming of the firstborn. And Orome, tamer of beasts, would ride too at whiles in the darkness of the unlit forests. As a mighty hunter, he came with spear and bow, pursuing to the death the monsters and fell creatures of the kingdom of Melkor. And his white horse Nahar shone like silver in the shadows.
Not bad.
Then the sleeping earth trembled at the beat of his golden hooves. And in the twilight of the world, Orome would sound Valaroma, his great horn, upon the plains of Arda. Whereat the mountains echoed, and the shadow of evil fled away, and Melkor himself quailed in Utumno, foreboding the wrath.
Very nice.
But even as Orome passed, the servants of Melkor would gather again, and the lands were filled with shadows and deceit.
Cool.
Now all is said concerning the manner of the earth and its rulers in the beginning of days, and ere the world became such as the children of Iluvatar have known it. For elves and men are the children of Iluvatar, and since they understood not fully that theme by which the children entered into the music, none of the Ainur dared to add anything
It's
to
tough
their
dirt.
flesh.
Holy shit.
For which reason, the Valar are to these kindreds rather their elders and their chieftains than their masters. And if ever in their dealings with elves and men the Ainur have endeavored to force them when they would not be guided, seldom has this turned to good, howsoever good the intent. The dealings of the Ainur have indeed been mostly with the elves, for Iluvatar made them more like in nature to the Ainur, though less in might and stature. Whereas to men, he gave strange gifts. For it is said that after the departure of the Valar there was silence, and for an age Iluvatar sat alone in thought. Then he spoke and said, "Behold, I love the earth, which shall be a mansion for the Quendi and the Atani. But the Quendi shall be the fairest of all earthly creatures, and they shall have and shall conceive and bring forth more beauty than all my children, and they shall have the greater bliss in this world. But to the Atani I will give a new gift.
Rebuild these.
Therefore he willed that the hearts of men
War ring
should
mail.
seek
Nice.
beyond the world, and should find no rest therein.
Build this.
They should have a virtue to shape their life amid the powers
Steel
and
battle
chances
axe.
of the world,
Okay.
beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else. And of their operation, everything should be in form and deed completed, and the world fulfilled unto the last and smallest. But Iluvatar knew that men, being set amid the
Stone.
turmoils of the powers of the world, would stray often, and would not use their gifts in harmony. And he said, "These two in their time shall find that all that they do redounds at the end only to the glory of my work."
Fuck yeah.
Yet
We're
the
making
elves
progress.
believe that men are often
I
a
think.
grief to Manwë,
I think we're making
who
progress.
knows most of the mind of Iluvatar. For it seems to the elves that men resembled Melkor most of all the Ainur, although he has ever feared and hated them, even those that served him.
The crystal descent.
It is one with this gift of freedom that the children of men dwell only a short
map
space
stone.
in the world alive,
Rebuild
and
the
are not
mine
bound to
hoist.
and depart soon. whither
The
elves
old
know
hoist is the only way to survive the
not.
first
Whereas
descent
elves
downward, but this is
remain until the
no
end of days, and their
simple
love of the
mechanism.
earth
Worked
and all
with
the
powerful
world is
ancient
more
runes
single and more
of
poignant,
craft and
therefore.
ingenuity. Time has
And
faded
as the
them to
years
reinscribe them. I will
lengthen,
need to
ever
crush.
more
I will need
sorrowful.
crushed black diamonds, the
For the
kinds,
elves
the
die
kind
not
of the
till
orcs
world
covet and
dies,
hoard.
unless they are slain or waste in grief, and to both these seeming deaths they are subject.
What is that? Let me look this
Neither
up.
does age subdue their strength, unless one grow weary of 10,000 centuries. and dying they are gathered to the halls of Mandos in Valinor, whence they may in time return. But the sons of men die indeed, and leave the world. Wherefore, they are called the guests, or the strangers.
Oh, okay.
Death is their
Notifications.
fate, the gift
That's what that is.
of Iluvatar, which as time wears even the powers shall envy. But Melkor has cast his shadow upon it, and confounded it with darkness, and brought forth evil out of good, and fear out of hope. Yet of old the Valar declared to the elves in Valinor that men shall join in the second music of the Ainur. Whereas Iluvatar has not revealed what he purposes for the elves after the world's end, and Melkor has not discovered it.
Rune table.
Aula and Yavanna.
Okay.
It is told that in their beginning the dwarves were made by Aula in the darkness of Middle-earth. For so greatly did Aula desire the coming of the children, to have learners to whom he could teach his lore and his crafts, that he was unwilling to await the fulfillment of the designs of Iluvatar. And Aula made the dwarves even as they still are, because the forms of the children who were to come were unclear to his mind, and because the power of Melkor was yet over the earth. And he wished, therefore, that they should be strong and
There's
unyielding.
another chest.
But fearing that the other Valar might blame his work, he wrought in secret. And he made first the 7 fathers of the dwarves
Steel
in a hall
ingots.
under the mountains in Middle-earth.
Let's make some steel ingots.
Now Iluvatar knew what was done, and in the very hour that Aula's work was complete, and he was pleased, and began to instruct the dwarves in the speech that he had devised for them, Iluvatar spoke to him, and Aula heard his voice and was silent. And the voice of Iluvatar said to him, "Why hast thou done this? Why dost thou attempt a thing which thou knowest is beyond thy power and thy authority? For thou hast from me as a gift thy own being only, and no more. And therefore the creatures of thy hand and mind can live only by that being, moving when thou thinkest to move them. And if thy thought be elsewhere standing idle, is that thy desire?" Then Aula answered, "I did not desire such lordship. I desired things other than I am, to love and to teach them, so that they too might perceive the beauty of Ea, which thou hast caused to be.
We'll go,
For it seemed to me that there is great room in Arda for many things that might rejoice
first
in,
base.
yet it is for the most part empty still, and dumb. And in my impatience I have fallen into folly. Yet the making of things is in my heart from my own making by thee. And the child of little understanding that makes a play of the deeds of his father may do so without thought of mockery, but because he is the son of his father. But what shall I do now, so that thou be not angry with me forever? As a child to his father, I offer to thee these things, the work of the hands which thou hast made.
What's it
Do
called?
with them what thou wilt. But should I not rather destroy the work of my presumption?" Then Aula took up a great hammer to smite the
We'll call
dwarves,
it
and he wept. But
bottom,
Iluvatar had
floor,
compassion upon Aula and his
western,
desire because of
hills.
his humility. And the dwarves shrank from the hammer and were afraid, and they bowed down their heads and begged for mercy. And the voice of Iluvatar said to Aula, "Thy offer I accepted even as it was made. Dost thou not see that these things have now a life of their own and speak
Okay.
with their own voices? Else they would not have flinched from thy blow, nor from any command of thy will." Then Aula cast down his hammer and was glad, and he gave thanks to Iluvatar, saying, "May Eru bless my work and amend it." But Iluvatar spoke again and said, "Even as I gave being to the thoughts of the Ainur at the beginning of the world, so now I have taken up thy desire and given to it a place therein. but in no other way will I amend thy handiwork. And as thou hast made it, so shall it be. But I will not suffer this, that these should come before the firstborn of my design, nor that thy impatience should be rewarded. They shall sleep now in the darkness.
Let's go deposit
under
at this
stone,
other base
and shall
camp.
not come forth
We need a
until
map
the
stone. We need to build a
firstborn
map stone over here.
awakened upon earth. And until that time, thou and they shall wait, though long it seem. But when the time comes, I will awaken them, and they shall be to thee as children, and often strife shall arise between thine and mine, the children of my adoption, and the children of my choice. Then Aula took the 7 fathers of the dwarves,
And then I'll head back. I'll map stone down.
in far sundered
Deposit
places.
some shit right now.
And he
Map stone
returned
down,
to
and then we'll be
Valinor,
good.
and waited while the long years lengthened. Since they were to come in the days of the power of Melkor, Aula made the dwarves strong to endure. Therefore they are stone-hard, stubborn, fast in friendship and in enmity, and they suffer toil and hunger and hurt of body more hardily than all other speaking peoples. And they live long,
Well, these
far
fucking rats are
beyond the
fast.
span of men, yet not forever. Aforetime it was held among the elves in Middle-earth that dying, the dwarves returned to the earth, and the stone of which they were made. Yet that is not their own belief, for they say that Aula, the Maker, whom they call Mahal, cares for them and gathers them to Mandos in halls set apart. And that he declared to their fathers of old that Iluvatar will hallow them and give them a place among the children in the end. Then their part shall be to serve Aula and to aid him in the remaking of Arda after the last battle. They say also that the 7 fathers of the dwarves return to live again in their own kin and to bear once more their ancient names, of whom Durin was the most renowned in after ages, father of that kindred most friendly to the elves, whose mansions were at Khazad-dûm. Now when Aula labored in the making of the dwarves, he kept his work hidden from the other Valar. But at last he opened his mind to Yavanna and told her of all that had come to pass. Then Yavanna said to him, "Eru is merciful. Now I see that thy heart rejoiceth, as indeed it may. For thou hast received not only forgiveness, but bounty. Yet because thou hiddest this thought from me until its achievement, thy children will have little love for the things of my love. They will love first the things made by their own hands, as doth their father. They will delve in the earth, and the things that grow and live upon the earth they will not heed.
Camp 2 Western Gates
Many
under
a tree
siege.
shall
Perfect.
feel the bite of their iron without pity."
Come here, little shits.
Aula answered, "That shall also be true
Fuck
of
you
the
guys.
children of Iluvatar, for they will eat and they will build. And though the things of thy realm have worth in themselves, and would have worth if no children were to come, yet Eru will give them dominion. And they shall use all that they find in Arda, though not by the purpose of Eru, without respect or without gratitude. Not unless Melkor darken their hearts," said Yavanna. And she was not appeased,
God damn it.
but grieved in heart, fearing what might be done upon Middle-earth in days to come. Therefore she went before Manwë, and she did not
Fuck outta
betray
here.
the counsel of Aula,
Fuck out of here, boy.
but she said,
Good.
"King of Arda, is it true, as Aula hath said
King
to me,
of
that the
Arda.
children, when they come, shall have dominion over all the things of my labor, to do as they will therewith?" "It is true," said Manwë. "But why dost thou ask? For thou hadst no need of the teaching of Aule."
Okay.
Then Yavanna was silent and looked into her own thought, and she answered, "Because my heart is anxious, thinking of the days to come. All my works are dear to me. Is it not enough that Melkor should have marred so
Okay,
many?
let's go to the next
Shall
map
nothing
stone.
that I have devised be free from the dominion of others? If thou hadst thy will, what wouldst thou reserve?" said Manwë. "Of all thy realm, what dost thou hold dearest? All have their worth, said Yavanna, and each contributes to the worth of the others. But the Kelvar can flee or defend themselves, whereas the Alvar that grow cannot.
We'll map
And
stone
among
down,
these I hold trees dear.
and we'll keep moving.
Long in the growing, swift shall they be in the felling.
Go to the crystal descent.
Unless they pay toll with fruit upon bough little mourned in their passing. So I see in my thought, would that the trees might speak on behalf of all things that have roots, and punish those that wrong them. This is a strange thought, said Manwë. Yet it was in the song, said Yavanna. For while thou wert in the heavens, and with Ulmo built the clouds and poured out the rains, I lifted up the branches of great trees to receive them, and some sang to Iluvatar amid the wind and the rain. Then Manwë sat silent, and the thought of Yavanna that she had put into his heart grew and unfolded, and it was beheld by Iluvatar. Then it seemed to Manwë that the song rose once more about him, and he heeded now many things therein that though he had heard them, he had not heeded before. And at last the vision was renewed, but it was not now remote, for he was himself within it. And yet he saw that all was upheld by the hand of Iluvatar, and the hand entered in, and from it came forth many wonders that had until then been hidden from him in the hearts of the Ainur. Then Manwë awoke, and he went down to Yavanna upon Ezelohar.
Guess how many
He sat
ranger
beside her
notes
beneath
there are.
the two trees. And Manwë said, O Kementari, Eru hath spoken, saying, do then any of the Valar suppose that I did not hear all the song, even the least sound of the least voice? Behold, when the children awake, then the thought of Yavanna will awake also, and it will summon spirits from afar, and they will go among the Kelvar and the Olvar. And some will dwell therein, and be held in reverence, and their just anger shall be feared. For a time, while the firstborn are in their power, and while the secondborn are young.
Horde is coming. Oh, fuck.
Dost thou not remember,
Drums.
Kementari, that thy thought sang not always
coming.
alone? Did not
Shit.
thy thought and mine meet also, so that we took wing together, like great birds that soar above the clouds? That also shall come to be
You little
by
fuckers.
the heed of Iluvatar. And before the children awake,
Oh, they're going to my base camp.
there shall go forth with wings like the wind the eagles of the lords of the west. Then Yavanna was glad, and she stood up, reaching her arms towards the heavens.
You
and
little
she
fucker.
said, I shall climb the trees of Kementari, that the eagles of the king may house therein. But Manwë rose also, and it seemed that he stood to such a height that his voice came down to Yavanna as from the paths of the winds. Nay,
One day.
only the trees of Aula will be calling up. In the mountains the eagles shall house, and hear the voices of those who call upon us. But in the forests shall walk the shepherds of the trees. Then Manwë and Yavanna parted for that time, and Yavanna returned to Aula, and he was in his smithy pouring molten metal
do this.
into a mold. Eru is bountiful, he said. Now let thy children beware, for there shall walk a power
Shit.
in the forests, whose wrath they will arouse at their peril. Nonetheless, they will have need of wood, said Aula. And he went on with his smith work. Of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor. Through long ages, the Valar dwelt in bliss in the light of the trees beyond the mountains of Aman. But all Middle-earth lay in twilight under the
Shit,
stars.
they're gonna break my shit.
While the lamps
Come on,
shone,
cook.
growth
Cook
began
faster!
there, which now was checked, because all was again dark. But already the oldest living things had arisen. In the seas, the great weeds, and on earth, the shadow of great trees.
I don't have anything
And in the
that'll
valleys of the
heal me.
night-clad hills, there were dark creatures old and
Oh my
strong.
god.
To those lands and forests, the Valar seldom came.
Oh, no!
They were the Yavanna and Oroma. And Yavanna would walk there in the shadows, grieving, because the growth and promise of the spring
Okay.
of Arda was
No!
And she set asleep upon many things that had arisen in the spring, so that they should not age, but should wait for a
No!
time of awakening that yet should be. But in the north, Melkor built his strength, and he slept not, but watched and labored.
No!
And
Why
the
is it
evil
lagging?
things that
Don't
he had
tell me it's gonna
perverted
crash.
walked abroad,
Don't
and
crash.
The dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. And in Otondo,
Why is it lagging?
he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked
Why
in
is it
darkness,
lagging?
and terror went
Why are my
before
frame rates dropping?
them. They had whips of flame.
I'm gonna die. No. Why?
In Middle-earth
Why?
in later days. And
How
in
did
that
I
dark
die?
time, Melkor bred many other monsters of divers shapes and kinds
What the fuck?
that long troubled the world.
Why did my frame rates drop
And
all
his
of a sudden?
realm spread now ever
Oh,
southward
now
over
it's fine.
Middle-earth. And Melkor made also a fortress and armory not far from the
Son of a
northwestern shores of the
bitch.
sea, to resist any assault that might come from Aman. That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband.
So fucking annoyed.
It came to pass that the Valar held council,
Okay.
for they became troubled by the tidings that Yavanna and Orome brought from the outer lands. And Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, Ye mighty of Arda, the vision of Iluvatar was brief and soon taken away, so that maybe we cannot guess within a narrow count of days the hour appointed. Yet be sure of this. The hour approaches, and within this age our hope shall be revealed, and the children shall awake.
So annoyed. Okay.
Shall we then leave the lands of their dwelling desolate and full of evil? Shall they walk in darkness while
Build
we have light?
another...
Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwë sits upon Taniquetil?
Scrap those.
And Tolkas cried, Nay, let us make war swiftly. Have we not rested from strife overlong? And is not our strength now renewed? Shall one alone contest with us forever? But at the
Sweet.
bidding of Manwë, Manwë
Okay.
spoke, and he said,
Steel ingot.
In this age,
Wood.
the children of Iluvatar shall come indeed,
Clothing.
but they come not yet. Moreover, it is
Stone.
doomed that the firstborn shall come in the darkness, and shall look first upon the stars. Great light shall be for their waning. To Vada ever shall they call at need.
Here.
Then Vada went forth from the council,
Here.
and she looked out from the height of Taniquetil, and beheld the darkness of
Ten
Middle-earth
ore.
beneath the innumerable
Up
stars, faint and far. Then she began a great labor, greatest of all the works of the Valar since their coming into Arda.
Fuck you, bro.
She took the silver dews from the vats of Telperion.
So annoyed.
Therewith
Okay.
she made new stars, and brighter against the coming of the firstborn. Wherefore, she whose name out of the deeps of time and the labors of Ea was Tintala, the kindler, was called after by the elves Elantari, queen of the stars, Carnhill, and Luinil, Nena, and Lumbar, Alcarinque, and Elamira she wrought in that time. And many other of the ancient stars she gathered together and set as signs in the heavens of Arda. Wilwarin, Telumendil, Soronume, and Anarima, and Menelmaka with his shining belt that forebodes the last battle that shall be at the end of days. And high in the north as a challenge to Melkor, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars to swing. Valakirka, the sickle
this
of the
dude's ass.
Valar, and sign of doom. It is told that even Nasvarda ended her labors, and they were long, when first Menelmakar strode up the sky, and the blue fire of Helluins flickered in the mists above the borders of the world. In that hour, the children of the earth awoke, the firstborn of Iluvatar. By the starlit mere of Cuivienin, water of awakening, they rose from the sleep of Iluvatar. And while they dwelt yet silent by Cuivienin,
Okay.
their eyes beheld first of all
Black diamond,
things
good.
the stars
Kept
of
that.
heaven. Therefore they have ever
Stone
loved the
is-
starlight,
Actually, we
and
have a
have
stone
revered
palette.
Varda
That's fine.
Elantari above all the
That
Valar.
down. This can go
In the changes of the
here.
world, the shapes of lands and of
Go
seas
there.
have been
This can
broken
go
and
there.
remade. Rivers have not kept their courses, neither have mountains
Copper.
remained
Nice.
steadfast. And to Cuivienin there is no returning. But it is said
Stone's
among the
fine.
elves that it lay far off in the east of Middle-earth, and northward, and it was a bay in the inland sea of Helkar. And that sea stood where aforetime the roots of the mountain of Iluin had been before Melkor overthrew it. Many waters flowed down thither from heights in the east. And the first sound that was heard by the elves was the sound of water flowing, and the sound of water falling over stone. Long they dwelt in their first home by the water
Here's
under
the
stars.
stone.
And they
Let's
walked
get
the
some
earth
more
in
steel
wonder.
ingots.
And they began to make speech and to give names to all things that they perceived. Themselves they named the Quendi, signifying those that speak
Perfect.
with voices, for as yet they had met no other living things that spoke or sang.
Yeah.
And on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastward in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of Helkar and passed under
go
the
clear out
shadows
these
of
goblins.
the Orokani, the mountains of the east. Then on a sudden, Naha set up a great neighing and stood still. And Orome wondered and sat silent, and it seemed to him that in the quiet of the land under the
Okay.
stars, he heard afar off many voices singing. Thus it was that the Valar found at last, as it were by chance, those whom they had so long awaited.
Inscribed runes make weapons and
Orome,
tools
looking
more
upon the
powerful.
elves, was filled with wonder, as though they were beings sudden and marvelous and unforeseen. For so it shall ever be with the Valar.
Build a fucking wall
From
again.
without the world,
Let's
though
see.
all
At least
things may be forethought
we didn't get
in
too
music or
fucked up.
foreshown in vision from afar, to those who enter verily into Ea,
that's-
each in its
that
time
is positive.
shall be met at unawares as something new and unforetold. In the beginning, the elder children of Iluvatar were stronger and
Alright, let's go.
greater than they have since become, but not more
we could
fair.
repair our armor, but you know what? We're fine.
Although the beauty of the Quendi in the days of their youth was beyond all other beauty that Iluvatar had caused to be,
Oh, you know what?
it has not perished, but lives
Let's
in the West.
Actually,
And sorrow
let's go
and
back.
wisdom have enriched it. And Orome loved the Quendi, and named them in their own tongue Eldar, the people of the stars. But that name was after borne only by those who followed him upon the westward road. Yet many of the Quendi were filled with dread at his coming, and this was the doing of Melkor.
Rebuild a rune
For
table.
by after knowledge the wise declare that Melkor, ever watchful, was first aware of the awakening of the Quendi,
not build it?
and sent shadows and evil spirits to spy upon them
For
and
Elvenwood?
waylay them.
But not have
So
enough
it came to
Elvenwood?
pass some years ere the coming of Orome, that if any of the elves strayed far abroad, alone or few together, they would often vanish and never return. And the Quendi said that the hunter had caught them, and they were afraid.
Are they over here?
And indeed, the most ancient songs of the elves,
Okay, let's
of
go
which
transport
echoes are remembered
back.
still in the west, tell of the shadow shapes that walk on the
Don't
hills
see
above
them.
Cuivienin. All would pass suddenly over the stars.
Okay.
And of the dark rider upon his wild horse that pursued those that wandered to take them and devour them. Now Melkor greatly hated and feared
Collect
the
that
riding of
later.
Orome. And either he sent indeed his dark servants
go-
as
actually, let's go
riders,
to our
or
first
he set
base.
lying whispers
Let's-
abroad
let's
for the
repair our
purpose
shit.
that the Quendi
Because I don't
should
want to go all the way
shun
down there
Orome
and then fucking
if
die.
ever they should meet. Thus it was that when Naha neighed, and Orome indeed came among them, Some of the Quendi hid themselves, and some fled and were lost. But those that had courage and stayed perceived swiftly that the great rider was no shape out of darkness, for the light of Aman was in his face, and all the noblest of the elves were drawn towards it. But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor, little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Autumno, or has explored the darkness of the councils of Melkor?
Huh.
Yet this is held true by the wise
Did
of
they?
Erestia,
Did somebody destroy that wall?
that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Autumno was broken were put there in prison, and by slow
torch has
arts
gone
of
out.
cruelty were corrupted and enslaved.
Torch.
And thus did Melkor breed the hideous
Small
race of the
throwable
orcs,
torch.
in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes.
Yoink.
For the orcs had life and multiplied after the
Alright,
manner
let's
of the children
repair
of
some of
Ilúvatar.
stuff.
Naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life.
Now we can head back.
Ever Melkor made since his rebellion in the Ainulindale before the beginning.
Actually, we
So
do have quite a
say
bit of
the
coal now
wise.
with us. Let's create a coal
Deep in
pallet.
their dark hearts,
at our other
the orcs
location.
loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery.
Floor Western Hills, yes.
This, it may be, was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Ilúvatar.
Okay.
Arama stayed a while among the Quendi, and then swiftly he rode back
That's
over land and
fine.
sea to Valinor, and brought the tidings to
Create,
Valmar.
let's see,
And he
coal.
spoke of the shadows that troubled Cuivienen.
Deposit all coal.
Then the Valar rejoiced, and yet they were in doubt amid their joy, and they debated long what counsel it were best to take for the guarding of the Quendi from the
Iron-
shadow of
Iron
Melkor.
pallet.
But Arame returned at once to Middle-earth, and abode with the elves.
There we go.
Manwë
all
sat
iron
long
ore.
in thought upon Taniquetil, and he sought the counsel of Ilúvatar. And coming then down to Valmar, he summoned the Valar to the Ring of Doom, and thither came even Ulmo
Hither,
from
thither.
the outer sea.
That
Then Manwë
away,
said to the Valar,
this away.
"This is the counsel of
That
Ilúvatar
away.
in my heart, that we should take up again the mastery of Arda, at whatsoever
that
cost,
away.
and deliver the Quendi from the shadow
cook
of
something.
Melkor." Then Tulkas was glad, but Aule was grieved, foreboding the hurts of the world that must come
What do we
at
need
that
for
strife.
Midley? Oh, Sunyan.
But the Valar made ready, and came forth from Aman in strength of war, resolving to assault the fortresses of Melkor.
Guess we can
and
go
make an
grab
end.
some Sunyan.
Never did Melkor forget that this war was made
should
for the
plant-
sake of the elves,
We should plant
and that they
Sunyan
were
down
the
here.
cause of his downfall.
And we need elven wood.
Yet they had no part in those deeds.
So
and
let's
they know little
go-
of the riding of the might of the
Let's
west
go grab some
against the
Sunyan
north
from our other
in the
camp.
beginning of their days. Melkor met the onset of the Valar in the northwest of Middle-earth, and all that region was much
Oh,
broken.
shit.
But the first victory of the hosts of the west was swift, and the servants of Melkor fled before them to Autumno. Then the Valar passed over Middle-earth, and they set a guard over Cuivienen, and thereafter the Quendi knew nothing of the great battle of the powers, save that the earth shook and groaned beneath them, and the waters
Okay.
were moved.
Hopefully
And
we
in
can
the
make it
north
there
were
without
lights as of
dying
mighty fires.
of starvation.
Long and grievous was the siege of Autumno, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which
Did they
naught but the
destroy-
rumour is known to the elves.
They
In that
destroyed
time, the
Sandy
shape
Torch
of
here?
Middle-earth was changed, and the great sea that sundered it from Aman grew wide and
Okay.
deep, and it broke in upon the coasts and made a deep gulf to the southward. Many lesser bays were made between the great gulf and Helcaraxa far in the north, where Middle-earth and Aman came nigh together. Of these, the Bay of Valar was the chief, and into it the mighty river Sirion flowed down from the new-raised highlands northwards. Dorthonion, and the
Fuck, am I
mountains
going the wrong
about
way?
Hithlum.
God damn it.
The lands of the far north were all made desolate in those days. For there, Autumno was delved exceeding deep, and its pits were filled with fires and with great hosts of the servants of Melkor.
We're gonna starve.
But at the last the gates of Autumno were broken, and the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the uttermost pit. Then
Why are we
Tulkas stood
lagging
forth
so
as champion of
bad?
the Valar, and wrestled with him, and
And I
cast
can't,
him upon
like,
his face.
pause it either,
And
which
he
is
was
kind of
bound
annoying.
with the chain Angainor that Aura had wrought.
I mean, everything's
and
loading
led
in like
captive,
super
and the
slow.
world had peace for a long age.
Boy.
Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband
Video.
and Utumno. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled
Turn this
into the
down
dark
to
and
high.
roamed in the waste places of the world awaiting a more evil hour. And Sauron they did not
Confirm?
find.
We're starting back up. I think we lost it. I don't know how much of the recording we lost. But we might have lost quite a bit of it. Let's see. I'm trying to see if I can pop it up. Make sure this is working. Mark as red. Okay. Let's go back to our...
They saw,
Make sure
and
this
by
is
many
working. Yes,
lands
it is.
and
Okay.
rivers they wished to abide.
Hopefully
Though
it's...
all were yet willing
working
to
again.
wander, many feared rather their journey's end
Okay.
than hoped for it. Therefore, whenever Orome departed, having at times other matters to heed, they halted and went forward no more until he returned to guide them. And it came to pass after many years of journeying in this manner that the Eldar took their course through a forest, and they came to a great river, wider than any they had yet seen, and beyond it were mountains whose sharp horns seemed to pierce the realm of the stars. This river, it is said, was even
let's
the
head
river
out.
which was after called Anduin the
Mapstone.
Great,
That's right.
and was ever the frontier of the westlands of Middle-earth. But the
Let's go
mountains were the
to
Hithaglia,
Crystal
the
Descent.
towers of mist upon the borders of Eriador. Yet they were
Eriador.
taller and more terrible in those days, and were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. Now the
Hopefully it's
Teleri
not
abode
corrupted
long
our
on the
last
east bank of
recording.
that
If not, I'll
river,
have to download
and
it.
wished to remain there.
But I don't think it is.
But the Vanyar and the Noldor
That it
passed
had
over
corruption
it.
protection or something on there,
Orome
but...
led them into the passes of the mountains. And when Orome was gone
Okay.
forward, the Teleri looked upon the shadowy heights, were afraid.
Let's light this baby up.
Then one arose in the
let's
host
see.
of Olwe,
Let's do some standing
which
torches.
was ever the
Oh,
hindmost
actually,
on the road.
it's actually pretty lit.
Lenwe, he was called. He forsook the westward march and led away a numerous people southwards down the great river, and they passed out of the knowledge of
Black
their kin
diamonds,
until
elven
long
wood,
years were
natural fiber.
passed. Those were the Nandor.
I need a lot of
and they
black
became
diamond,
a
huh?
people apart, unlike their kin, save that they loved water and dwelt most beside falls and running streams. Greater knowledge they had of living things, tree and herb, bird and beast, than all other elves. In after years, Denethor, son of Lenwe, turned again west at last, and led a part of that people over the mountains into Beleriand, ere the rising of the moon. At length, the Vanyar and the Noldor came over Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains, between Eriador and the westernmost
True
land of
quartz.
Middle-earth, which the elves
Xerac
after named
torch?
Beleriand.
What?
And the foremost companies passed over the Vale of Sirion
Crystal
and
flare.
came down to the shores of the Great Sea between Drengist and the Bay of Balar.
Where is torch?
But when they
Okay.
beheld it, great fear came upon them, and many withdrew into the woods and highlands of Beleriand. Then
Torch crafted by
Orome
true
departed
quartz
and
inscribed with
returned
runes of
to
power.
Valinor
It
to
never
seek the
goes
counsel
out.
of Manwë.
Ooh.
And the host of the Teleri passed
I'm about
over
to
the
build that.
misty mountains and crossed the wide lands
Darkness
of Eriador,
Falls.
being urged on by Elwë Singolo. For he was eager to return to Valinor and the light that he had beheld. And he wished not to be sundered from the Noldor, for he had great friendship with Finwë, their lord. Thus, after many years, the Teleri also came at last over Ered Luin into the eastern regions of Beleriand. There they halted and dwelt a while beyond the river Gelion.
Holy shit.
Of Thingol and Melian. Melian was a Maya of the race of the Valar. She dwelt in the gardens of Moria.
Can I
And
build...
among all his people there were none more beautiful than Melian, nor more wise, nor more skilled in songs of enchantment. It is told that the Valar would leave their works and the birds
so
of
I
Valinor
can.
their mirth.
Can I build
The
on this
bells
wall?
of
I
Valmar
can't.
were silent, and the fountains
But I don't
ceased
know
to
if
flow
it'll work.
when, at the mingling of the lights, Melian sang in Lorien. Nightingales went always with her,
Maybe not?
and she taught them their song. And she loved the deep shadows of the great trees. She was akin before the world was made to Yavanna herself.
Okay.
And in that time when the Quendi awoke beside the waters of Cuivienen, she departed from Valinor and came to the Hitherlands. And there she filled the silence of
Hither.
Middle-earth
Okay.
before the dawn with her
Fuck.
voice and the voices of her bird.
So
Now, when their
I
journey
gotta
was
find a
near
way to
its
get
end,
down there.
as has been told, the people of the
I
Teleri
need-
rested long in East Beleriand, beyond the river Gellion. And at that time, many of the Noldor still lay to the westward, in those forests that were afterwards named
If I
Neldor
drop, I die.
and Region. Elwë, lord of the Teleri, went often through the great woods to seek out Finwë,
Spiders
his
down
friend
there?
in the
Okay.
dwellings of the Noldor. And it
We'll come
chanced
back.
on a time that he came alone to the
Come back.
starlit wood of Nan
We need
Elmar.
more black
And
diamond.
there suddenly he heard the song of nightingales. Then an enchantment fell on him, and he stood still. And afar off, beyond the voices of the Lomalindi,
Let's go
he heard the voice of
to
Melian.
first base.
and it filled all his heart with wonder.
We'll make our way
and
to the
desire.
second area, and
He
then
forgot
we
then
have one
utterly
black diamond.
all
We
his
need
people
14
and
more.
all the purposes of his mind. And following the birds under the shadow of the trees, he passed deep into Nan Elmath and was lost. But he came at last to a glade open to the stars, and there Melian stood. And out of the darkness
Tired?
he looked at her,
I need to
and
rest.
the light of Aman
Okay,
was
let's-
in her face.
Fuck.
She spoke no word,
Okay,
but
let's
being
go.
filled with love, Elwë came to her and
To our
took her
other
hand,
base camp.
and straightway a spell was laid on him, so that they stood thus while long years were measured by the
So
wheeling
we-
stars above them.
We need
And the
hordes
trees
of enemies
Nan
to kill.
Elmath grew tall and dark
Right?
before they spoke
That's what we
any
need.
word. Thus, Elwë's folk who sought him found him not, and Olwë took the kingship of the Teleri and
It
departed,
was,
as is told.
Oh, I need to look at the
Elwë
maps
Singwar
or the thing
came
for
never
the.
again across the sea to Valinor, so long as he lived. And Melian returned not thither while their realm together
Thither.
lasted. But of her there came among both elves and men a strain of the Ainur who were with Iluvatar before Ea. In after days he became a king renowned, and his people were all the Eldar of Beleriand. The Sindar they were named, the Grey Elves, the Elves of the Twilight. And King Greymantle was he, Elu Thingol in the tongue of that land. And Melian was his queen, wiser than any child of Middle-earth, and their hidden halls were in Menegroth, the 1,000 caves in Doria. Great power Melian
White
lent
bean
to
seed.
Thingol, who was himself great among the Eldar, for he alone of all the Sindar had seen with his own eyes the trees in the day of their flowering. And king though he was of Umanya, he was not accounted
let's get
among the Mori
to
Quendi,
town.
but with the elves of the light, mighty upon Middle-earth.
Let's cook.
And of the love of Thingol
Sleep.
and Melian, there came into
be
the
alright.
world the fairest of all the
Medley
children
skewer.
of
Start
Iluvatar,
cooking that.
that was
Go to bed.
or shall ever be.
It's been a minute since we rested. Let's wake up. Let's
Eldamar
eat.
and the princes of the Eldalir. In time, the hosts of the Vanya
Okay.
and Noldor came to the
So we'll
last
put the Sunyan
western
away. We'll
shores
put
of
the beans away.
Hitherlands. In the north, these shores in the ancient days after
Put
the
this
battle
away.
of the powers bent ever westward,
These away.
until in the
Hide
northernmost
scraps.
parts
We
of
need-
Arda, only a narrow sea divided Aman, upon
Let's
which
see.
Valinor was built, from the Hitherlands.
From the hither
But
thitherlands.
this narrow sea was filled with grinding ice, because of the violence of the frosts of Melkor. Therefore, Orome did not lead the hosts of the Elder
Great
into the
forge
far
of
north,
Navi. Okay,
but
so
brought
steel
them to
ingot.
the fair lands about the river Sirion, that
Hide.
afterwards
11
were
hide.
named Beleriand.
11 hide and a
And
steel
from
ingot
those shores
is what I
whence
need.
first the Eldar looked in
So
fear and
hide.
wonder on the sea, there stretched an ocean wide and dark and deep, between them and the
Hide.
mountains of
Wait,
Aman.
was it hide scraps or hide? Fuck.
Now Ulmo, by the counsel of the Valar, came to the shores of Middle-earth and spoke with the Eldar who waited
Hide.
there, gazing on the dark waves.
11 hide.
And because of his words and the music which he made for them on his horns of shell, their fear of the sea was turned rather to desire. Therefore Ulmo uprooted an island which long had stood alone amid the
There we
sea,
go.
far from either shore since the
We
tumults
have
of the
that.
fall of Iluin. And with the aid of his servants he moved it, as it were, a mighty ship, and anchored it in the bay
We
of
have
Valar,
that. We
into
have
which
wood.
Sirion poured his water.
I think. Oh, a steel
Then
ingot.
the
That's right.
Vanyar and the Noldor embarked upon that isle, and were drawn over the sea, and came at last to the long shores beneath the mountains of Aman. And they entered Valinor, and were welcomed to its bliss. But the eastern horn of the
Where's
island,
the steel
which was
ingot?
deep grounded in the shoals off the mouths
We
of
only have
Sirion,
iron,
was
copper.
broken asunder, and remained behind. And that, it is said, was the Isle
Needs
of
light.
Balar, to which afterwards
stone hearth.
Ossif often came. But the Teleri remained still in Middle-earth,
Am I missing
for
it?
they dwelt in East Beleriand, far from the sea.
Oh, there it is. Steel ingot.
And they
Okay.
heard not the summons of Ulmo until too late.
Let's go get
And
some
many
elven
searched still
wood,
for
make our way
Elwë,
over to the
their
Great
lord,
Forge,
And without him they
Let's
were
forge
unwilling
this.
to depart.
Mastercraft
But when they learned that
torch.
Ingwe and Finwë
That
and
never
their
goes
peoples
out.
were gone, then many of the Teleri pressed on to the shores
bear.
of Beleriand, and dwelt thereafter near the mouths of Sirion, in longing for their friends that had departed. And they took Olwe, Elwë's brother, to be their king. Long they remained by the coasts of the Western Sea, and Osse and Uinen came to them and befriended them.
Bear nest.
And Osse instructed them, sitting upon a rock near to the margin of the land, and of him they learned all manner of sea lore and sea music. Thus it came to be that the Teleri, who were from the beginning lovers of water and the fairest singers of all the elves, were after enamored of the seas, and their songs were filled with the sound of waves upon the shore. When many years had passed, Ulmo hearkened to the prayers of the Noldor and of Finwë, their king, who grieved at their long sundering from the Teleri, and besought him to bring them to Aman, if they would come.
Okay.
And most of them
Fuck
proved
these
now
guys up.
willing indeed. But great was the grief of Ossif when Ulmo returned to the coasts of Beleriand to bear them away to Valinor. For his care was for the seas of Middle-earth and the shores of the Hitherland. And he was ill-pleased that the voices of the Teleri should be heard no more in his domain. Some he persuaded to remain, and those were the Falathrim, the elves of the Falas, who in after days had dwellings at the havens of Brithumbar and Eglarest, the first mariners in Middle-earth, and the first makers of ships. Círdan, the shipwright, was their lord. The kinsfolk and friends of Elwë Singolo also remained in the Hitherlands, seeking him yet, though they would fain have departed to Valinor and the light of the trees, if Ulmo and Olwe had been willing to tarry longer. But Olwe would be gone, and at last the main host of the Teleri embarked upon the isle, and Ulmo drew them far away. Then the friends of Elwë were left behind, and they called themselves Eglath, the Forsaken People. They dwelt in the woods and hills of Beleriand, rather than by the sea, which filled them with sorrow. But the desire of Aman was ever in their hearts.
Get our first Mastercraft, baby.
But when Elwë awoke from his long trance, he came forth from Nan Elmath with Melian, and they dwelt thereafter in the woods in the midst of the land. Greatly though he had desired to see again the light of the trees, in the face of Melian he
these
beheld the
go
light
out?
of Aman, as in an unclouded mirror, and in that light he
I
was
didn't think these went out. I guess they do.
His people gathered about him in joy, and they were amazed. For fair and noble as he had been, Now he appeared, as it were, a lord of the Maya, his hair as grey silver, tallest of all the children of Iluvatar, and a high doom was before him.
Okay. Let's craft
Now
it, baby.
Ossett followed after the host of
Let's
Odwin.
go.
And when they were come to the bay of Eldamar,
That's so
which
fucking
is
cool.
Elvenhome,
Okay.
he called to them, and they knew his voice, and begged
So we
Ulmo
got
to
room
stay
for
their
one
void.
thing.
And Ulmo granted their request. And at his bidding, Osse made fast the island and rooted it to the foundations of the sea. Ulmo did this the more readily, for he understood the hearts of the Teleri. And in the council of the Valar he had spoken against the summons, thinking that it were better for the Quendi to remain in Middle-earth. The Valar were little pleased to learn what
Let's
he
go
had
back
done.
to our
And
base
Finwë
camp
grieved
over
when the
here.
Teleri came not, and yet more when he learned that Elwë was forsaken, and knew that he should not see him again unless it were in the halls of Mandos. But the island was not moved again, and stood there alone in the bay of Eldamar. And it was called Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Isle.
Tol
There the
Eressëa.
Teleri abode as they wished under the stars of heaven,
Okay.
and yet within sight of Ammon and the deathless shore.
Let me make sure my stream's up.
And by that long sojourn apart in the Lonely Isle was caused the sundering of their speech from that of the Vanyar
Yes.
and the Noldor.
Yes,
To
it is.
these the
Okay, cool.
Valar had given a land and a dwelling place. Even among the radiant flowers of the tree-lit gardens of Valinor, they longed still at times to see the stars. And therefore a gap was made in the great walls of the Pelori. And there, in a deep valley that ran down to the sea, the Eldar raised a high green hill. Tuna, it was called. From the west, the light of the trees fell upon it, and its shadow lay ever eastward. And to the east it looked towards the bay of Elvenhome, and the lonely isle, and the shadowy seas. Then through the Calakiria, the pass of light, the radiance of the blessed realm streamed forth, kindling the dark waves to silver and gold.
Okay.
And it touched the lonely isle, and its western shore grew green and fair. There bloomed the first flowers that ever were east of the mountains of Ammon.
So we found
Upon
a
the
pretty
crown
good
of Tuna,
location.
the city of the elves was built. The white walls and terraces of Tirion.
I like it. I like it.
And the highest of the towers of that city was the Tower of Ingwe, Mindon El Dalieva,
Let's
whose silver
rebuild
lamp
the room
shone
table.
far out into the mists of the sea. Few are the ships of mortal men that have seen its slender beam. In
What is
Tirion
this?
upon Tuna, the Vanyar and the Noldor dwelt long in fellowship.
Chance to
since
create a
of all
shockwave
things in
knocking back
Valinor
enemies.
they loved most the white
Bonus
tree,
damage against orcs glows when they are
Yavanna
near
made for them
sapphire.
a tree
Ooh.
like to a lesser image of
Okay.
Telperion, save
Put
that it did not
some
give
wood
light
away.
of its own being. Galathilion it was named in the Sindarin tongue.
Put that away.
This tree was
that
planted in
away.
the courts beneath the Mindon, and there flourished,
away.
and its seedlings
That
were
away.
many in Eldamar. Of these, one was afterwards planted in Tol Eressëa, and it prospered there, and was named Celeborn. Thence came in the fullness of time, as is elsewhere told, Nimloth, the white tree of Númenor. Manwë and Vara loved most the Vanyar, the fair elves. But the Noldor were beloved of Aule, and he and his people
more
came
sapphire.
often among them. Great became their knowledge and their skill, yet even greater was their thirst for more knowledge,
Okay.
and in many things they soon surpassed their teachers. They were changeful in speech, for they had great love of words, and sought ever to find names more fit for all things that they knew
So
or
we found the
imagined.
crystal descent.
And it came to
Great
pass
Forge and
that
Narvi.
the masons of the
Let's
house
see how
of Finwë, quarrying
far
in the
down we
hills
can go
after
again.
stone, for they delighted in the building of high towers,
Let's go back to
first
the crystal
discovered
descent.
the earth gems, and brought them forth in countless myriads. And they devised tools for the cutting and shaping of gems, and carved them in many forms. They hoarded them not, but gave
The
them
lower
freely,
deeps.
and by their labor enriched all Valinor. The Noldor afterwards came back to Middle-earth, and this tale tells mostly of their deeds. Therefore the names and kinship of their princes may here be told, in that form which these names later bore in the tongue of the elves of Beleriand. Finwë was king of the Noldor.
Let's
The
mine.
sons of Finwë were Feanor and Fingolfin and Finarfin. But the mother of Feanor was Miriel Serinda, whereas the mother of Fingolfin and Finarfin was Indis of the Vanyar. Feanor was the mightiest in skill of word and of hand, more learned than his brothers. His spirit burned as a flame. Fingolfin was the strongest, the most steadfast, and the most valiant. Finarfin was the fairest and the most wise of heart. And afterwards, he was a friend of the sons of Olwe, lord of the Teleri, and had to wife Eowyn, the swan maiden of Alqualande, Olwe's daughter. The 7 sons of Feanor were Maethros the tall, Maglor the mighty singer, whose voice was heard far over land and sea, Celegorm the fair, and Caranthir the dark, Corofin the crafty, who inherited most of his father's skill of hand, and the youngest, Amrod and Amras, who were twin brothers alike in mood and face. In later days they were great hunters in the woods of Middle-earth, and a hunter also was Celegorm, who in Valinor was a friend of Orome, and often followed the Vala's horn. The sons
we have a lot of
Fingolfin
stone.
were
We should
Fingon,
start
who was afterwards king
blocking
of the
some of this
Noldor in
stuff
the
up.
north of the world, and Turgon, lord of Gondolin. Their sister was Arathel the White. She was
people
younger
running.
in the years of the Eldar than her brothers, and when she was grown to full stature and beauty, she was tall and strong, and loved much to ride and hunt in the forests. There she was often in the company of the sons of Feanor, her kin, but to none was her heart's love given. Arthaniel she was called, the White Lady of the Noldor, for she was pale, though her hair was dark, and she was never arrayed but in silver and white. The
Perfect.
sons of Finarfin were Finrod the
Okay.
Faithful, who was afterwards named Felagund, Lord of Caves,
Elven
Orodred,
wood.
Angrod, and
Get rid of
Aeglor.
the clothing scraps. Let's get elven
These
wood
4
and
were as
regular
close in
wood.
friendship with the sons of
parsnips.
Fingolfin as though they were all brothers.
I see
A sister they
bread.
had, Galadriel, most beautiful of all the house of Finwë.
Okay.
Her hair was lit with gold as though it had caught
This is
in a
iron?
mesh, the radiance of Laurelin.
Let's get a ton of iron now.
Here must be told how the Teleri came at last to the land of Aman. Through a long age they dwelt in Tal
We need
Eressëa,
hordes.
but slowly
That's what
their
we need.
hearts were changed, and were drawn towards the light that flowed out over the sea to the lonely isle. They were torn between the love of the music of the waves upon their shores, and the desire to see again their kindred, and to look upon the splendor of Valinor. But in the end, desire of the light was the stronger. Therefore, Ulmo, submitting to the will of the Valar, sent to them Osseth, their friend. And he, though grieving, taught them the craft of shipbuilding. And when their ships were built, he brought them as his parting gift many strong-winged swans. Then the swans drew the white ships of the Teleri over the windless sea, and thus at last and latest they came to Aman and the shores of Eldamar. There they dwelt, and if they wished, they could see the light of the trees, and could tread the golden streets of Valmar and the crystal stairs of Tirion upon Tunar, the green hill. But most of all, they sailed in their swift ships on the waters of the Bay of Elvenholm, or walked in the waves upon the shore with their hair gleaming in the light beyond the hill. Many jewels the Noldor gave them, opals and diamonds and pale crystals, which they strewed upon the shores and scattered in the pools. Marvelous were the beaches of Elende in those days. And many pearls they won for themselves from
Might
the
just
sea,
drop my
and their halls
sword and
were
shield.
of pearl, and of pearl were the mansions
Use that as a
of
backup,
Olwe,
my backup weapon.
Alqualande, the haven of the swans, lit
Because
with many lamps.
This two-handed
Well,
weapon's
that
gonna
was
be a
their
lot
city,
better.
and the haven of their ships. And those were made in the likeness of swans, with beaks of gold, and eyes of gold and jet. The gate of that harbor was an arch of living rock sea-carved, and it lay upon the confines of Eldamar, north of the Kalakiria, where the light of the stars was bright and clear. As the ages passed, the Vanyar grew to love the land of the Valar and the full light of the trees, and they forsook the city of Tirion upon Tuna, and dwelt thereafter upon the mountain of Manwë, or about the plains and woods of Valinor, and became sundered
Nice.
from the Noldor.
I think that's it.
But the
Here.
memory of Middle-earth under the stars remained in the hearts of the Noldor,
Okay.
and they abode in the Kalakiria, and in the hills and valleys within sound of the Western Sea.
Let's rebuild some of this again.
And though many of them went often about the land of the Valar, making far journeys in search of the secrets of
going out.
land and water and all living things, yet the peoples of Tuna and Alqualande drew together in those days.
Oi!
Finwë was king in Tirion, and Olwë in Alqualande. But Ingwë was ever held the high king of all the elves. He abode thereafter at the feet of Manwë upon Taniquetil. Feanor and his sons abode seldom in one place for long, but travelled far and wide upon the confines of Valinor, going even to the borders of the dark and the cold shores of the outer sea, seeking the unknown. Often they were guests in the halls of Aule, but Celegorm went rather to the house of Orome, and there he got great knowledge of birds and beasts, and all their tongues he knew.
Okay.
For all living things
let's
that
head
are
back.
or have been in the kingdom of Arda, save only the fell and evil creatures of Melkor, lived then in the land of Aman. And there also were many other creatures that have not been seen upon Middle-earth, and perhaps never now shall be, since the fashion of the world was changed.
Shit.
Of
Where we're supposed to
Feanor
go.
and the unchaining of Melkor.
I like the way this one glows, too.
Now the three kindreds of the Eldar were gathered at last in Valinor, and Melkor was chained. This was the noontide of the Blessed Realm, the fullness of its glory and its bliss, long in tale of years, but in memory too brief. In those days, the Eldar became full-grown in stature of body and of mind, and the Noldor advanced ever in skill and knowledge, and the long years were filled with their joyful labors, in which many new things, fair and wonderful, were devised. Then it was that the Noldor first bethought them of letters, and Rumil of Tirion was the name of the lawmaster, who first achieved fitting signs for the recording of speech and song, some for graving upon metal or in stone, others for drawing with brush or with pen. In that time was born in Eldamar, in the house of the king in Tirion upon the crown of Tunar, the eldest of the sons of Finwë, and the most beloved. Curufinwë was his name. But by his mother he was called Feanor, Spirit of Fire, and thus he is remembered in all the tales of the Noldor. Miriel was the name of his mother, who was called Serinda because of her surpassing skill in weaving and needlework. For her hands were more skilled to fineness than any
Let's not
hands,
die
even
now.
among the Noldor.
Medley
The love of
skewers.
Finwë and Miriel was great and glad,
Let's
for it
rest.
began in the blessed realm
200 to
in
fall
the
asleep,
days
that's
of
fine.
bliss.
Can we eat
But
something?
in the bearing of her son,
Let's see.
Miriel was
That
consumed
away,
in spirit
that
and body.
away.
And after his birth, she yearned for release from the labor of living. And when she had named him, she said to Finwë, "Never again shall I bear child,
Yep.
for
Okay.
strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth
Rest.
into Feanor." Then
Eat up.
Finwë was grieved, for the Noldor were in the youth of their days, and he desired to bring forth many children into the bliss of Aman. And he said, "Surely there is healing in Aman. Here all weariness can find rest." But when Miriel languished still, Finwë sought the counsel of Manwë, and Manwë delivered her to the care of Irmo in Lorien. At their parting, for a little while, as he thought, Finwë was sad, for it seemed an unhappy chance that the mother should depart and miss the beginning at least of the childhood days of her son. "It is indeed unhappy," said Miriel, and I would
I'm
weep
gonna deposit all the
if I were
coal,
not so weary.
all iron.
But hold me blameless in this, and in all
Collect
that
the
may
steel.
come on. She went then to the gardens of
Steal
Lorien
away.
and lay down to sleep. But though she seemed to sleep, her spirit indeed departed
this
from
away.
her body, and passed in
This
silence
here,
to the halls
this
of
here.
Mandos. The
Wood.
maidens of Este tended the body of Miriel,
Put that
and
away.
it remained
Put that
unwithered,
away.
but she did not
I
return.
think we're good there. Ranger's
Then
journal,
Finwë lived
journal
in
page.
sorrow,
We'll keep that
and
for
he
right
went
now.
often to the gardens of Lorien, and sitting
Okay.
beneath the silver willows beside the body of his wife, he called her by her names. But it was unavailing, and alone in all the blessed realm, he
Head
was
back.
deprived of joy.
Pick up some more shit.
After a while, he went to Lorien.
We're gonna need another chest.
All
or at
his
least a
love he
pallet.
gave thereafter to his son.
Another pallet, maybe.
And Feanor grew swiftly, as if a secret fire were kindled within him. He was tall and fair of face and masterful, his eyes piercingly bright, and his hair raven dark. In the pursuit of all, his purposes eager
Bone
and
cold.
steadfast. Few ever changed his course
There's
by
nothing to
counsel,
mine here,
none
right?
by force. He became of all the Noldor, then or after, the most subtle in mind and the most skilled in hand.
No.
In his youth, bettering the work of Rumil, he devised those letters which bear his name, and which the Eldar used ever after. And he it was who, first of the Noldor, discovered how gems greater and brighter than those of the earth might be made with skill. The first gems that Feanor made were white and colorless, but being set under starlight, they would blaze with blue and silver fires brighter than Helluin. And other crystals he made also, wherein things far away could be seen small but clear, as with the eyes of the eagles of Manwë. Seldom were the hands and mind of Feanor at rest. While still in his early youth, he wedded Nerdanel, the daughter of a great smith
What am I
named
doing?
Martan,
Hitting too many
among
buttons.
those of the Noldor most dear to Aule. And of Martan, he learned much of the making of things in metal and in stone. Nerdanel also was firm of will, but more patient than Feanor, desiring to understand minds rather than to master them. And at first, she restrained him when the fire of his heart grew too hot. But his later deeds grieved her, and they became estranged. 7 sons she bore to Feanor. Her mood she bequeathed in part to some of them, but not to all. Now it came to pass that Finwë took as his second wife Indis the Fair. She was a Vanya, close kin of Ingwe the High King, golden-haired and tall, and in all ways unlike Miriel. Finwë loved her greatly and was glad again. But the shadow of Miriel did not depart from the house of Finwë, nor from his heart. And of all whom he loved, Feanor had ever the chief share of his thought. The wedding of his father was not pleasing to Feanor, and he had no great love for Indis, nor for Fingolfin and Finarfin, her sons. He lived apart from them, exploring the land of Ammon, or busying himself with the knowledge and the crafts in which he delighted. In those unhappy things which later came to pass, and in which Feanor was the leader, many saw the effect of this breach within the house of Finwë, judging that if Finwë had endured his loss and been content with the fathering of his mighty son, the courses of Feanor would have been otherwise, and great evil might have been prevented. For the sorrow and the strife in the house of Finwë is graven in the memory of the Noldorin elves. But the children of Indis were great and glorious, and their children also. And if they had not lived, the history of the Eldar would have been diminished. Now even while Feanor and the craftsmen of the Noldor worked with delight, foreseeing no end to their labors, and while the sons of Indis grew to their full stature, the noontide of Valinor was drawing to its close. For it came to pass that Melkor, as the Valar had decreed, completed the term of his bondage, dwelling for 3 ages in the duress of Mandos alone. At length, as Manwë had promised, he was brought again before the thrones of the Valar. Then he looked upon the glory and their bliss, and envy was in his heart. He looked upon the children of Iluvatar that sat at the feet of the mighty, and hatred filled him. He looked upon the wealth of bright gems, and he lusted for them. But he hid his thoughts, and postponed his vengeance. Before the gates of Valmar, Melkor abased himself at the feet of Manwë, and sued for pardon, vowing that if he might be made only the least of the free people of Valinor, he would aid the Valar in all their works, and most of all, in the healing of the many hurts that he had done to the world.
Let's see.
And Nienna aided his prayer, but Mandos was silent. Then Manwë granted him pardon. But the Valar would not yet suffer him to depart beyond their sight and vigilance, and he was constrained to dwell within the gates of Valmar. But fair seeming were all the words and deeds of Melkor in that time, and both the Valar and the Eldar had profit from his aid and counsel, if they sought it. And therefore, in a while, he was given leave to go freely about the land. And it seemed to Manwë that the evil of Melkor was cured. For
Hey,
Manwë
Psychotic,
was
how's it
free
going?
from evil,
Hey, so I
and
found
could not
the
comprehend it.
crystal
And he
descent,
knew that in the beginning, in the thought of Iluvatar,
what you were talking about.
Melkor had been even as he.
I have not gone down there. Look while
And
I
he
figure
saw
out some
not to the
financial.
depths of
I know,
Melkor's
so
heart,
figure out some
and
financial
did not
bullshit.
perceive that all love
Sounds
had
good.
departed from him forever.
Yeah, I don't know.
Ulmo was not deceived.
I haven't gone
Tulkas
down to the
clenched
crystal.
his hands whenever he saw Melkor, his foe, go by.
I haven't gone down to
For
the
if
crystal
Tulkas
descent yet,
is slow
but
to wrath,
we'll
he
see.
is slow
I'm
also
trying to get
to
black
forget.
diamonds so I can rebuild it.
But they obeyed the judgment of Manwë. For those who will defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel. Now in his heart Melkor most hated the Eldar, both because they were fair and joyful, and because in them he saw the reason for the arising of the Valar and his own downfall. Therefore, all the more did he feign love
Coin,
for them and
or
seek their
fragments.
friendship. And he
Wood
offered them the
scraps.
service of his lore and labor in any great deed that they would do.
Coin.
The Vanya indeed held him in suspicion, for they
Sucks.
dwelt in the light of the trees and were content. And to the Teleri he gave small thinking them of little worth, tools
let's keep
too
mining.
weak for his designs.
We need
But the
we need to
Noldor
get
took
attacked by
delight in the
hordes,
hidden knowledge
and
that
we
it
need
revealed
fucking
to them, and some hearkened to words
Black
that it
Diamond.
would have been better for them never to have heard. Melkor indeed declared afterwards that Feanor had learned much art from him in secret, and had been instructed by him in the greatest of all his
Celeb?
works.
Okay.
But he lied in his lust and his envy.
What?
For none of the elderly
What do you have to
ever
mine for
hated
Black
Melkor
Diamond?
more than Feanor,
Is it from
son of
anything?
Finwë, who first named him Morgoth. And snared though he was in the webs of Melkor's malice against the Valar,
What is it?
he held no converse with him and took no counsel from him. For Feanor was driven by the fire of his own heart only, working ever swiftly and alone. And he asked the aid and sought the counsel of none that dwelt in Aman, great or small, save only and for a little while of Nerdanel the wise, his wife. Of the Silmarils and the unrest of the Noldor. In that time were made those things that afterwards were most renowned of all the works of the elves. For Feanor, being come to his full might, was filled with a new thought, or it may be that some shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near. And he pondered how the light of the trees, the glory of the blessed realm, might be preserved imperishable. Then he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore and his powers, and his subtle skill, and at the end of all he made the Silmarils. As
The
3 great
Silmarils.
jewels they were in form, but not until the end, when Feanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting, and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls, shall it be known of what substance they were made. Like the crystal of diamond,
Does it seem like
and yet
copper
was
drops
more
black
strong
diamond?
than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar. The house of its inner fire that is within it and yet in all parts of it.
Okay, let's go drop off some more shit.
And the inner fire of the Silmarils Feanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda. And yet, as were they indeed living things, they rejoiced in light and received it, and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. All who dwelt in Aman were filled with wonder and delight at the work of Feanor. And Varda hallowed the Silmarils, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them, but it was scorched.
This is stone, right? Yeah.
And Mandos foretold that the fates of Arda, earth, sea, and air lay locked within them.
Fuck, I wish I could.
The heart of Feanor was fast bound to these things that he himself had made. Then Melkor lusted for the Silmarils, and the very memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. From that time forth, inflamed by this desire, he sought ever more eagerly how he should destroy Feanor and end the friendship of the Valar and the Elves.
Okay.
But he dissembled his purposes with cunning, and nothing of his malice could yet be seen in the semblance that he wore.
To pause it?
Long was he at work, and slow at first, and barren was his labor. But he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil indeed, while others reap and sow in his stead. Ever Melkor found some ears that would hear him, and some tongues that would enlarge what they had heard. And his lies passed from friend to friend, the secrets of which the knowledge proves the teller wise.
Okay.
Bitterly did the Noldor atone
let's
for
head
the
back,
folly
pick
of
up
their
some more
open
shit.
ears in the days that followed after. When he saw that many leaned towards him, Melkor would often walk among them, and amid his fair words others were woven, so subtly that many who heard them believed in recollection that they arose from their own thought. Visions he would conjure in their hearts of the mighty realms that they could have ruled at their own will, in power and freedom in the east.
Okay,
and then
let's grab some shit real quick.
The Valar had brought the Eldar to Aman
and then
because of their jealousy, fearing that the beauty of the Quendi and the Maker's power that Iluvatar had bequeathed to them would grow too great for the Valar to govern, as the elves waxed and spread over the wide lands of the world. In those days, moreover, though the Valar knew indeed of the coming of men that were to be, the elves as yet knew naught of it, for Manwë had not revealed it to them. But Melkor spoke to them in secret of mortal men, seeing how the silence of the Valar might be twisted to evil. Little he knew yet concerning men, for engrossed with his own thought in the music, he had paid small heed to the third theme of Iluvatar.
Okay.
But now the whisper went among the elves that Manwë held them captive, so that men might come and supplant them in the kingdoms of Middle-earth. For the Valar saw that they might more easily sway the short-lived and weaker race, defrauding the elves of the inheritance of Iluvatar.
We'll go rest.
Small truth was there in this, and little have the Valar ever
be on for about another
to sway
20
the wills
minutes.
of men. But many of the Noldor believed, or half believed, the evil words. Thus, ere the Valar were aware, the peace of Valinor was poisoned. The Noldor began to murmur against them, and many became filled with pride, forgetting how much of what they had and knew came to them in gift from the Valar. Fiercest burned the new flame of desire for freedom and wider realms in the eager heart of Feanor.
Starving?
And Melkor laughed in his secrecy, for to that mark his lies had been addressed, hating Feanor above all, and lusting ever for the Silmarils. But these he was not suffered to approach, for though at great feasts Feanor would wear them blazing on his brow, at other times they were guarded close, locked in the deep chambers of his hoard in Tirion. For Feanor began to love the Silmarils with a greedy love, and grudged the sight of them to all, save to his father and his 7 sons. He seldom remembered now that the light within them was not his own. High princes were Feanor and Fingolfin, the elder sons of Finwë, honored by all in Aman. But now they grew proud and jealous, each of his rights and
Let's
his
do
possessions.
a
Then Melkor set new lies
Copper,
abroad in
star
Eldamar,
mill,
and
copper.
whispers came to Feanor that
Let's do a copper
Fingolfin
palette.
and his sons
Do
were
it
plotting to
here.
usurp the leadership of Fenway and of the elder line of Feanor, and to
lot
supplant
of
them
copper.
by the leave of the Valar. For the Valar were ill-pleased that the
Copper
Silmarils
ingot, that's
lay
fine.
in Thirion and were not committed
It's a
to their
leb.
keeping.
Put that down here.
But to Fingolfin and Finarfin it was said, "Beware. Small love has the proud son of Miriel ever had for the children of Indis.
What do we need for
Now
repair
he has
smithy?
become great,
Can we build one here?
and he has his father in his hand. It will not be long before he drives you forth from
Repair
Tular."
smithy. There we go. Yeah, let's do one here.
And when Melkor saw that these lies were smoldering, and that pride and
we
anger
can just
would
repair our
awake
ship
among
here.
the Noldor, he spoke to them concerning weapons.
Perfect.
And in that time the Noldor began the
Okay.
smithying of swords and axes
Smithying?
and spears.
Each a schmiffy.
Shields also they made, displaying the
Old
tokens
oat.
of many houses and kindreds that vied one with another. And these only they wore abroad, and of other weapons they did not speak, for each believed that he alone had received the warning. And Feanor made a secret forge, of which not even Melkor was aware. And there he tempered fell swords for
Mushrooms.
himself and for his sons, and made
Let's go
tall helms
mine.
with plumes of red.
Maybe? Maybe not?
Bitterly did Matan
There
rue
was
the
a
day when he
area
taught
to
to the
mine over here.
husband of Nerdonel all the lore of metalwork that he had learned of Aule. Thus, with lies and evil whisperings and false counsel, Melkor kindled the hearts of the Noldor to strife. And of their quarrels came at length the end of the high days of Valinor, and the evening of its ancient glory. For
There we go.
Feanor now began openly to speak words of rebellion against the Valar, crying aloud that he would depart from Valinor back to the world without, and would deliver the Noldor from thraldom if they would follow him.
Silver ore.
Then there was great unrest in Tirion, and Finwë was troubled,
Oh,
and he
here we go.
summoned all his lords to council.
This is coal.
But Fingolfin hastened to his halls and stood before him, saying, "King and father, wilt thou not restrain the pride of our brother, Finwë, who is called the Spirit of Fire all too truly? By what right does he speak for all our people as if he were king? Thou it was who long ago spoke before the Quendi, bidding them accept the summons of the Valar to Aman. Thou it was that led the Noldor upon the road through the perils of Middle-earth to the
Little
light
shits.
of Eldamar. If thou dost not now repent of it, 2 sons at least thou hast to honor thy words."
Fragments.
But even as Fingolfin spoke, Feanor strode into the
meat.
chamber, and he was fully armed, his high helm upon his head, and at his side a mighty sword. "So it is, even as I guessed," he said. "My half-brother would be before me with my father in this as in all other matters." Then turning upon Fingolfin, he drew his sword, crying, "Get thee gone, and take thy due place." Fingolfin bowed before Finwë, and without word or glance to Feanor, he went from the chamber. But Feanor followed him, and at the door of the king's house he stayed him. And the point of his bright sword he set against Fingolfin's breast. "See, half-brother," he said, "this is sharper than thy tongue. Try but once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, and maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls." These words were heard by many, for the house of Finwë was in the great square beneath the Mindon. But again Fingolfin made no answer, and passing through the throng in silence, he went to seek Finarfin, his brother. Now the unrest of the Noldor was not indeed hidden from the Valar, but its seed had been sown in the dark, and therefore, since Feanor first openly spoke against them, they judged that he was the mover of discontent, being eminent in self-will and arrogance, though all the Noldor had become proud. And Manwë was grieved, but he watched and said no word. The Valar had brought the Eldar to their land freely, to dwell or to depart, and though they might judge departure to be folly, they might not restrain them from it. But now the deeds of Feanor could not be passed over, and the Valar were angered and dismayed. And he was summoned to appear before them at the gates of Valmar, to answer for all his words and deeds. There also were summoned all others who had any part in this matter, or any knowledge of it. And Feanor, standing before Mandos in the Ring of Doom, was commanded to answer all that was asked of him.
An
Then
orc
at last
stronghold.
the root
Where?
was laid bare, and the malice of Melkor revealed. And straightway Tulkas left the council to lay hands upon him and bring him again to judgment. But Feanor was not held guiltless, for he it was that had
Where's the
broken
orc
the peace
stronghold?
of Valinor and drawn his sword upon his kinsman. And Mandos said to him,
Mission
Thou
halls.
speakest of
The
thraldom.
mines.
If thraldom it be, thou canst not escape it. For Manwe is king of Arda, and not of Aman only. And this deed was unlawful, whether in Aman or not in Aman. Therefore, this doom is now made. For 12 years thou shalt leave Tirion, where this threat was uttered. In that time, take
Run this
counsel with
way.
thyself,
What is this way?
and remember who
I know we came
and
here
what thou
before,
art.
but what are we
But after
missing?
that time, this matter shall be set in peace, and held redressed if others will release thee. Then Fingolfin said, I will release my brother. But Feanor spoke no word in answer, standing silent before the Valar. Then he turned and left the council, and departed
Stone?
from Valmar. With him into banishment went his 7 sons,
What
and
up here?
northward in Valinor they made a strong place and treasury in the hills. And there at Formenos a multitude of gems were laid in hoard, and weapons also, and the Silmarils were shut in a chamber of iron. Thither also came Finwë the king, because of the love that he bore to Feanor. And Fingolfin ruled the Noldor in Tirion. Thus the lies of Melkor were made true in seeming, though Feanor by his own deeds had brought this thing to pass. And the bitterness that Melkor had sown endured, and lived still long afterwards between the sons of Fingolfin and Feanor. Now Melkor, knowing that his devices had been revealed, hid himself, and passed from place to place as a cloud in the hills. And
go this way.
Tulkas sought for him in vain. Then it seemed to the people of Valinor that the light of the trees was dimmed, and the shadows of all standing things grew longer and darker in that time. It is told that for a time Melkor was not seen again in Valinor, nor was any rumor heard of him, until suddenly he came to Formenos and spoke with Feanor before his doors. Friendship he feigned with cunning argument, urging him to his former thought of flight from the trammels of the Valar. And he said, Behold the truth of all that I have spoken, and how thou art banished unjustly.
Okay.
But if the heart of Feanor is yet free and bold, as were his words in Tirion, then I will aid him, and bring him far from this narrow land. For am I not Valar also? Yea, and more than those who sit in pride in Valimar. And I have ever been a friend to the Noldor, most skilled and most valiant of the people of Arda. Now Feanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mandos, and he looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. And Melkor, seeing that Feanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last,
Okay.
Here is a strong place and well guarded. But think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the realm of the Valar.
So I only do 2.
But his cunning overreached his aim. His words touched too deep, and awoke a fire more fierce than he designed. And Feanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance, and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Then hate overcame Feanor's fear,
So if we go
and he cursed Melkor and bade him begone, saying,
here.
Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail crow
Here.
of Mandos. And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. Then
Here.
Melkor departed in shame, for he was himself in peril, and he saw not his time yet for revenge. but his heart was black with anger. And Finwë
I don't know
was
what
filled with great
I'm
fear,
doing, but
and in haste he sent messengers to Manwë
fuck it,
in Valmar.
right?
Now the Valar was sitting in council before their gates, fearing the lengthening of the shadows, when the messengers came from Formenos. At once, Orome and Tulkas sprang up, but even as they set out in pursuit, messengers came from Eldamar, telling that Melkor had fled through the Kalikiria. And from the hill of Tunar, the elves had seen him pass in wrath as a
Go
thundercloud.
here. Ah.
And they said that Densi had turned northward, for the Teleri in Alqualande had seen his shadow going by their haven towards Arama.
Shit.
Thus Melkor departed from Valinor, and for a while the two trees shone again unshadowed, and the land was filled with light. But the Valar sought in vain for tidings of their enemy. And as a cloud far off that looms ever higher, borne upon a slow, cold
Very
wind,
nice. Very nice.
a doubt now marred the joy of all the dwellers in Aman, dreading they knew not what evil that yet might come. Of the darkening of Valinor. When Manwë heard of the ways that Melkor had taken, it seemed plain to him that he purposed to escape to his old strongholds in the north of Middle-earth. And Orome and Tulkas went with all speed northward, seeking to overtake him if they might.
So what is...
But they found no trace or rumor of him beyond the shores of the Teleri, in the unpeopled wastes.
Doesn't seem like there's
that drew
anything
near
that
to
way.
the ice.
Okay.
Thereafter, the watch was redoubled along the northern fences of Aman, but to no purpose. For ere the pursuit set out, Melkor had turned back, and in secrecy passed away far to the south. For he was yet as one of the Valar, and could change his form or walk unclad, as could his brethren, though that power he was soon to lose forever. Thus, unseen, he came at last to the dark region of Avathar. That narrow land lay south of the Bay of Eldamar, beneath the eastern feet of the Pelori.
Okay.
And its long and mournful shores stretched away into the south, lightless and unexplored.
Cool.
There, beneath the sheer walls of the mountains and the cold, dark sea,
So
the
what
shadows
is
were deepest
over
and
here,
thickest
then?
in the world. And there, in Avathar, secret and unknown, Ungoliant made her abode.
Oof.
The Eldar
Brilliant.
knew not whence she came, but some have said that in ages long before, she descended from
There's
the
nothing
darkness
up here.
that lies about Arda, when Melkor first looked down in envy upon the kingdom of Manwë, and that in the beginning she was one of those that he corrupted to his service. But she had disowned her master, desiring to be mistress of her
Nothing
own
really
lust,
to destroy.
taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. And she fled to the south, escaping the assaults of the Valar and the hunters of Orome, for their vigilance had ever been to the north, and the south was long unheeded. Thence she had crept towards the light of the Blessed Realm, for she hungered for light and hated it.
Okay.
In a ravine she lived, and took shape as a spider of monstrous form, weaving her black webs in a cleft of the mountains. There she sucked up all light that she could find, and spun it forth again in dark nets of strangling gloom, until no light more could come to her abode, and she was famished.
Okay.
Now Melkor came to Avathar and sought her out, and he put on again the form that he had worn as the tyrant of Utumno, a dark lord, tall and terrible. In that form, he remained ever after.
Alright, we're gonna be getting off soon.
There in the black shadows,
So we can start
beyond the
heading back to
sight even
town.
of Manwë in his highest halls,
shit.
Melkor, with Ungoliant, plotted his revenge. But when Ungoliant understood the purpose of Melkor, she was torn between lust and great fear, for she was loath to dare the perils of Aman and the power of the dreadful lords, and she would not stir from her hiding. Therefore Melkor said to her, "Do as I bid, and if thou hunger still when all is done, then I will give thee whatsoever thy lust may demand, yea, with both hands." Lightly he made this vow, as he ever did, and he laughed in his heart. Thus did the great thief set his lure for the lesser. A cloak of darkness she wove about them when Melkor and Ungoliant set
I think we found
unlight, in which
found a way to
things
get up
seemed
here,
be
which
no
is
more,
good.
and which eyes could not pierce, for it was void. Then slowly she wrought her way,
jumped
rope
across.
by rope, from cleft to cleft, from jutting rock to pinnacle of stone, ever climbing upwards, crawling and clinging, until at last she reached the very summit of High Armentir, the highest mountain in that region of the world, far south of Great Taniquetil. There the Valar were not vigilant, for west of the Pelori was an empty land in twilight, and eastward the mountains looked out, save for forgotten Avathar, only upon the dim waters of the pathless sea. But now upon the mountaintop, dark Ungoliant lay, and she made a ladder of woven ropes and cast it down, and Melkor climbed upon it and came to that high place and stood beside her, looking down upon the guarded realm. Below them lay the woods of Orome, and westward shimmered the fields and pastures of Yavanna, gold beneath the tall wheat of the gods. But Melkor looked north, and saw afar the shining plain and the silver domes of Valmar gleaming in the mingling of the lights of Telperion and Laurelin. Then Melkor laughed aloud and leapt swiftly down the long western slopes, and Ungoliant was at his side.
Let's see if there's anything here.
Darkness covered them.
Before
now
we
it was a time of festival,
head down,
as Melkor knew well. Though all tides and seasons were at the will of the Valar, and in Valinor there was no winter of death, nonetheless they dwelt then in the kingdom of Arda, and that was but a small realm in the halls of Ea, whose life is time,
wood palette,
which flows ever from the first note to the last chord of Eru. And even as it was then the delight of the Valar, as is told in the Ainulindale, to clothe themselves as in a vesture in the forms of the children of Ilúvatar.
Still looking for ranger notes.
Did they eat and drink?
And journal page. There we go.
Yavanna from the earth, which under Eru they had made. Therefore, Yavanna set times for the flowering and the ripening of all things that grew in Valinor, and at each first gathering of fruits, Manwë made a high feast for the praising of Eru, when all the peoples of Valinor poured forth their joy in music and song upon Taniquetil. This now was the hour. Manwë decreed a feast more glorious than any that had been held since the coming of the Eldar to Aman. For though the escape of Melkor portended toils and sorrows to come, and indeed none could tell what further hurts would be done to Arda ere he could be subdued again, at this time Manwë
this is that building that I never went inside. Well, shit.
The Noldor, and all were bidden to come to his halls upon Taniquetil,
God damn it.
there to put aside the griefs that lay
this whole time I thought I
princes,
found something good, but
the lies of their enemy. There came the Vanya, and there came the Noldor of Tirion, and the Maya were gathered together.
The fuck is that way?
The Valar were arrayed in their beauty and majesty, and they sang before Manwë and Varda in their lofty halls, or danced upon the green slopes of the mountain that looked west towards the trees. In that day, the streets of Valmar were empty, and the stairs of Tirion were silent, and all the land lay sleeping in peace.
All right, let's go this way.
Only the Teleri beyond the mountains still sang upon the shores of the sea.
Oh, you know what?
For
We should
they
probably
recked
head out.
little of
Yeah, let's go head back.
times, and gave no
I think we're
thought
done
to the
for the
cares of
day.
the rulers of Arda, or the shadow that had fallen
head
on
back.
Valinor, for it had not touched them as
We'll
yet.
end here.
One thing only marred the design of Manwë.
I mean, we got quite a bit
Feanor
done.
came indeed. For him alone, Manwë had commanded to come. But Finwë came not, nor any others of the Noldor of Formenos. For said Finwë,
see if we can make our way
while the ban
down.
lasts upon Feanor, my son, that he may not go to Tirion, I hold myself unkinged, and I will not meet my people. And Feanor came not in raiment of festival,
do it.
and he wore no ornament, neither silver nor gold nor any gem. and he denied the sight of the Silmarils.
Alright, let's go to the bottom.
Valar and the Eldar,
To our
and
base
left them
camp.
locked in Formenos in their chamber of iron. Nevertheless, he met Fingolfin before the throne of Manwë, and was reconciled in word.
Let me figure out how many
Fingolfin set at
journal
naught the
pages I
unsheathing
need.
of the sword.
Ranger
For
journals.
Fingolfin held forth his hand, saying, "As I promised, I do now. I release thee, and remember no grievance." Then Fëanor
I
took
think
his
we got
hand
quite
in
a bit
silence.
done.
But Fingolfin said, "Half-brother in blood, full brother in heart will I be. Thou shalt lead, and I will follow. May no new grief divide us." "I hear thee," said Fëanor. "So be it." But they did not know the meaning that their words would bear. It is told that even as Fëanor and Fingolfin stood before Manwë, there came the mingling of the lights,
Deposit all
when
copper.
both trees were shining, and the
Deposit
silent
all
city of
coal.
Valmar was filled with a radiance of silver
Deposit
and gold.
stone.
And in that very hour, Melkor and Ungoliant came hastening over the fields of Valinor, as the
fuck is
shadow
that
of a
guy?
black cloud upon the wind fleets over the sunlit earth. And they came before the green
Steel,
mound
bronze,
Ezalar.
copper. Oh, we need a
Then
bellows.
the
That's right.
unlight of
What do we need
Ungoliant
for a
rose
bellows?
up even to the roots of the trees. And Melkor sprang upon the mound, and with his black
Ooh, bellows.
spear he smote each tree to its core, wounding them deep.
Let's build a
And their
bellows here.
sap poured forth as it were their blood, and was spilled upon the ground. But Ungoliant sucked
Gem
it
cutter.
up, and
Sweet.
going then from tree to tree, she set her black beak to their wounds till they were drained. And the poison of death that was in her went into their tissues, and withered them root, branch, and leaf, and they died. And still she thirsted, and going to the wells of Vada, she drank them dry. But Ungoliant
Drank
belched
them
forth
dry.
black vapors as she drank, and swelled to a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor was afraid. So the great darkness
Sapphire.
fell upon Valinor.
Topaz. We need more topaz.
Of the
huh?
deeds of that day, much is told in the Aldudania that Elomira of the Vanyar made,
Copper
and is known
ingot.
to all the Eldar. Yet no song or tale could contain all the grief and terror
Okay.
that then befell. The
I think
light
with that, we're
failed,
going to be out.
but
Thanks
the
for
darkness
popping in.
that
Thank you,
followed
Psychotic. Thank you for people
was
that are
more than
lurking.
loss of light.
We are 3
In that hour
hours
was made a darkness
and
that seemed
3
not
minutes into
lack,
our
but
audiobook.
a
So that'll be my spot to end off on. Hope everybody has a great day. Take it easy and have a good one.